guys, I'm here at NABI, North American Honeybee Expo. I know Cayman loves that.
That's why we use it.
Yes, he loves us calling it that.
He shouldn't have let us know.
Yeah, well, he shouldn't
like
have named it that if he didn't want us to call it that. So,
who wants to sit around and say,
NABI.
Here we go to North American Honeybee Expo?
Yeah,
I don't have the
NABE.
time.
So, I'm here with Dr. David Peck with Betterbee,
Yep.
PhD, and I've got Cory Stevens, who has a master's in entomology,
Correct.
and Phoebe Snyder, and you've got a master's in biology. I have a master's in agricultural economics.
Nice.
There you go. We're a well-credentialed crew.
You guys are research, and I'm like, okay, practical application.
How do we make money at
Yeah,
this?
how does this make money?
Well, we can all read a graph, and that's what matters.
True.
Yeah. Well, I usually wait until somebody else tells me what the graph says.
I said we can read a graph. I didn't say we like to.
I can. And I wanted to get you guys together because times they are a-changing, I feel like, in Varroa mites, which has been the biggest economic problem, the biggest ecological problem for honeybees in the history of keeping mellifera. You know, globalization in a way was good for mellifera because it spread mellifera all across the world. European honeybees went places they've never been before. And now globalization is spreading pests and parasites all over the world. Varroa got introduced to mellifera in probably the 50s in Siberia or eastern China. And since then it's everywhere. There's only a few places in the world now that Varroa is not, since in Australia.
Fewer every year.
Yeah, and now not only have we got that to worry about, but it looks like Tropicalaps is spreading, so we've got that on the horizon. It's kind of a doom and gloom, has been for a long time, but there is a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
And it looks like we are finding new and better ways to breed mite resistance into the European honeybee. There's a lot of ways that mites can be resistant to, or honeybees can be resistant to mites, but the most common one across the world in resistant populations seems to be VSH, of which uncapped recap is a part of that, where the bees are actually sensing that something is wrong with that brood, it's stressed, and then they're uncapping and either checking it out and thereby disrupting the mite's reproductive cycle just by opening the cell, because mites need the cell to be closed. So they either keep the mites from reproducing, or if that brood is parasitized, they pull it out. That seems to be what we think is the best mechanism of resistance, the most common mechanism in resistant populations. The problem has been, how do you find that and how do you select for it? The Bond method, James Bond, Live and Let Die, was for a long time, let the bees die and then breed from the survivors. Well, that is hard to do when you're trying to make money.
It's selection with a sledgehammer.
Yeah. And it hammers your pocket, and it hammers your financial well-being if you're trying to make a living at beekeeping.
Well, plus you lose a ton of diversity. I mean, a ton, because if there's selective pressure like using UBeeO, like Phoebe and Cory have come up with, it's more precise. And you can use that as part of an IPM program and select and keep some of the higher honey production lines. Because like Tom's, bees that he studied, it just hammered them into.
There's a beautiful graph that
unit.
shows you the reduction in the number of matrolines, the number of female, genetic lineages in the Arnott forest. So it was interesting. So the graph from the Arnott forest survivor bees in Ithaca was cool because it showed us that we went from this large diversity of matrolines, of sort of queen lineages in that population in the 1970s. Through this period, when Varroa arrived, a dramatic population decline and contraction took place. A lot of those matrolines went extinct, but then those survivors did recolonize and re-expand, so the population size was similar, but they'd gone through that genetic constriction. They didn't lose a lot of overall genomic diversity, though. because even the colonies that were dying of mites were still making drones, and those drones were still mating with the queens from the surviving lineages.
Interesting.
So the complexity of honeybee genes, where it's not just one mom and one dad makes the whole family, that you've got 20 dads and one mom, and mom's going to last for 2 or 3 years, and her daughters are going to mate with her uncles or nephews or whoever it is, means that there's opportunities in honeybees for you to avoid some of that worst bottlenecking, but you're still going to have it. If I've got 10,000 colonies and I've decided I'm going to keep my business afloat and I'm going to make a mite-resistant bee by just letting them all die except for the survivors, I might get to the end of a couple of years and I've got one colony left. That's not a profitable beekeeping enterprise.
Yeah.
And I might get to the end and have that one colony also die from mites. And now I've got no bees left.
Right.
What I learned was I had no resistance in my whole population. So it's clearly not a sustainable or a wise tactic.
I know a couple of operations on a commercial scale, Troy Hall and Kirk Webster, that have been treatment free, and they've got hundreds of hives, not thousands. Troy had a 90% loss year. I know Kirk Webster's had at least one 70 or 75% loss year. That's tough.
Yeah.
And
even with
it's
Kirk,
just really tough.
Kirk was doing cultural varroa management at the same time that he was allowing those bees to die, in those contraction years, because he's still splitting those colonies, and those brood breaks are part of how the colonies are getting through with varroa.
So, testing and finding the VSH while managing downside risk is a problem. The way that Cory, who is a VSH queen breeder, has been doing this is he tells all his buddies, "Hey, come on down. We're gonna have barbecue, and this is gonna be a fun weekend. It's awesome." And then it turns into a beekeeping sweatshop. He doesn't allow you to leave. We do Harbo
Look at
assays.
the data we got, though. It was worth it.
So you have been on a sideline level for a long time. You've worked a full-time job, so you don't have as much downside risk. So you've run a treatment-free apiary for a long time. You started with great genetics. You bought breeder queens from Harbo. You concentrated on that. And then you started doing Harbo assays to continually select to enforce that into your population. And the way that you do that is the Harbo assay. You take brood frames of a certain age, you pull 100 brood out by hand, one by one, and you score it. You look for reproductive mites. And if you want non-reproductive mites, and if you want them to get the highest score, you have to go to 200 cells.
If you don't have a good showing in 100, if it's inconclusive,
takes 15 or 20 minutes to do each one, and it is just mind-numbingly painful to do.
Some people like it. There's a few freaks out there.
There's a meditative quality.
There is.
No, there's not.
Matt and Megan Kobe came down, and Megan loves it. So I'm afraid that, I hate that she's in Michigan and not at least northern Missouri, because she actually does love it. So there's a few people.
It's cute to hear you complaining about the Harbo assay, because I've done all sorts of these tests, and a man who complains about the Harbo assay is a man who has never done a leg counting grooming test. Sitting there going, oh good, I've got 75 mites, I gotta pick each one up with a toothpick, I've gotta get it under the microscope, I gotta wear a mask the whole time, because if I sneeze it's gonna blow across the room. If I poke it a little too hard on the leg and I break it off, now I don't know if the bees did it or not. There are a lot of tests that you can do to find out both some of the same traits in a resistant population and some different traits. Obviously grooming is different than VSH. Is a UBeeO response, a VSH response, a freeze-killed brood hygienic response, are they the same? Are they different? How much overlap is there between them? So what we need is a good understanding of what kind of resistances these bees can show. We need good tests that we can use to select populations. And then you made a good point. You've got queens that part of your stock started from Harbo. You've been breeding using his test.
And Tom Glenn, but that was USDA too.
But you're doing the work to curate and cultivate that lineage going forward. So if somebody buys a queen from you, they can keep buying queens from you, and you're going to keep doing the work.
I hope they do.
That'd be nice. But some of them are gonna propagate from those lines.
And I encourage that too. And I encourage testing with UBeeO. If you want to do Harbo,
and that's just it.
Too.
Is that once you've curated along one line, if you've got another test, certainly an easier test. If we decide overall as an industry, as beekeepers, that UBeeO is the test for us that we find much easier,
way faster.
That's been my experience too. Then it means that somebody who's bought some queens from you a couple of years ago, they said, well, I'm going to do a little grafting. I'm going to breed a couple of queens, or I'm just going to make some splits, and I want to know who I want my queen sources to be as they raise their new queens. That's an opportunity for them to grab a UBeeO kit, and for them to go do a quick UBeeO test and say, well, I know they were all VSH from Cory 3 generations back. These ones are scoring best on the UBeeO, so I guess those will be my breeders.
Right.
It lets us continually cultivate our own bees, even if we don't have the time to do the grooming tests and to do the Harbo assays every year.
Well, I don't think you could pay me enough to do grooming tests.
It sounds like all he has to pay you is barbecue.
I really don't. No, that was a total bait and switch.
You learned your lesson. You won't be back.
He didn't mention that.
Now that you're here.
So the Harbo test, from an economic perspective, it's tough for someone past the sideline or hobbyist level. Like if you move into the commercial, unless you're specifically selling broodstock, it's hard to add that into your program because it takes so much time, and that hive swarms or whatever, it's just hard to add it. And not only that, but you need to rear queens in February if you're in Florida, March, April, May, June, most of the country, and for the Harbo test to work, you've got to have mite pressure.
Yeah, that's
so
a big issue.
You have to have the mites. The hardest part of it is getting enough mites to do your test.
And that interferes
you have
with your
to have
RPM.
mites in the hive for the Harbo test to work.
Right.
So if you're cleaning up your bees in the fall and then in the winter with oxalic acid, you have very low mite pressure in spring, the Harbo test is no good. You need to wait until August or July when mites have rebounded, and at that point it's too late to rear queens.
Right. You hope they don't get a late season
so
superseed or whatever.
you need to test that queen and then hold them until the following spring to rear daughters from them at that point. So there's severe problems with that testing methodology. And again, this is what we think is the most valuable mite resistance mechanism.
Well, it was the first one. You were talking about things changing.
Yeah.
Before, people were like, okay, I'm going treatment free. What are you selecting for? Did the bees get lucky? It wasn't precise. There was nothing, you couldn't measure it. It's just, I don't know, they didn't die. I mean, is that tolerance? That may not even be resistance. They may have just, tolerance seems loose to me. It's like they got lucky falls into tolerance, I almost feel like. And maybe not. If it's immeasurable or we know, but it seems like
but
it's
none of that was
loosely
quantified.
defined.
When folks were just saying, I'm
It's
just
not
going to see what
measurable.
happens,
Right.
the bond method is not at its core a repeatable or even comprehensible selection.
There's no data.
You can get to the end and look at the bees and go, oh, look, they do this now. But you're not collecting data anywhere in the process.
Sure,
You're not learning anything. You're just letting the bees do something in the hopes that it leads to a better result.
And you could lose a lot of stuff. You could lose a lot of production. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Ithaca forest bees, they're typically small. They're typically swarmy. Am I incorrect there?
I wouldn't call them swarmy.
Okay.
They swarm frequently in the forest. So in their
Normal
ecology,
swarming.
normal swarming of forest-living bees.
But would they be
when
large
I
enough
when
to
I put them in
produce?
hives, I've moved them into production hives. But the key is these are these famous survivor bees. They've got multiple mite-resistant traits. They're high grooming, they're high uncapping, recapping, they're high VSH. They've got all of those traits to some measurable degree.
Awesome.
But when I moved them into production hives, they were very charming bees. They grew, they made a lot of honey, and their mite populations eventually got high enough to kill them. So they weren't mite-proof bees. They had mite resistance traits. They also had a mite-resistant lifestyle of swarming regularly, having brood breaks, living in constricted areas, getting honey bound. And so all of those things together, that's a holistic system that makes for a bee that doesn't have as much mite mortality as hives in my backyard that I don't treat.
Do you think some of that was the constricted cavity size?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, that was part of it.
So
but absolutely, they have these resistance traits too. So all of it's happening at once. but the question is, how constructive is that? How helpful is that? They might be a neat breeding stock for you to start with, but you're still going to have to do more breeding and selection to get a bee resistant enough to go into your production.
Yes. We need the UBeeO on.
So UBeeO, unhealthy brood odor, as opposed to
UBeeO is a verb now.
Yeah, we're going to UBeeO them.
I UBeO'd my bees. UBeeO, unhealthy brood odor. So the way we think VSH works is the bees are very responsive to the stress chemicals coming from the brood, and it's like a cell phone reception thing. You know, you've got the antenna on the phone, you've also got the antenna sending the signal. So some brood may send more of that at a lower threshold. Some bees may be more sensitive to it.
So would that be SMR more so, like from a brood function? I know
we did this last year.
How long have we got?
Go back and watch my 2-hour rant in the last recording.
Is this going to be 4 hours?
If we're going to throw out brand new acronyms, we've got to mention what that is.
Well,
SMR is where VSH started. That was suppressed mite reproduction.
But if you're doing a Harbo,
VSH and SMR were running in parallel until they tested them and went, oh, we're doing the same thing. We just got 2 names for the same thing. Sorry. But is it the same thing, or are they actually different things?
I don't know, because like whenever we UBeO'd I would say an SMR tested line of bees, there was massive overlap, but at the same time we talked about divergence. Like one of my breeders was a 4 on a Harbo scale. It was 100% suppressed mite reproduction, and it like ignored the UBeO.
Yeah.
So like, what in the devil is that?
Right.
And then you go down to my other breeder that was a 4 on a Harbo assay. They threw the pupae out the front door.
They were great on the UBeO.
Right. So
right.
That's why I pulled that thread. I probably shouldn't have pulled. Is like, what is VSH? Because maybe that's the SMR without a hygiene component.
Is VSH that pupa that's incredibly sensitive to getting bitten and then throws off alarm bells right away, or is it a bee walking around on the outside smelling for any tiny little odor?
It's Phoebe, can you answer that question for us?
Yeah, Phoebe, answer this question that we haven't been able to figure out for a few decades.
Yeah. Yes, happy to do so. It was surprising, because James Lee had done some testing for us earlier this season too, and had found the same thing, and I just assumed that he did UBeO wrong, and I was like, that's impossible. What are you talking about? James, yeah. And then until you were seeing the same thing too, it was pretty surprising for Kara.
But some of those, Kara's like, go back and look at those queens. I think they were color-coded whenever we tested them. Whenever I went back and looked, it was an unmarked queen in there. So now I'm going completely insane. So next year, I have to go the extra mile, make sure I see the color dot, verify it, because me and Kara went through there, and then we'll have a little bit clearer picture. You know, like any scientist, we need more data.
Yeah.
Right. But that I think, so we started this with the idea that we've been fighting Varroa for a long time. It's not been fun. We've had a lot of challenges. We've been doing a lot of work, and it's felt for a while like we weren't making a lot of progress. It's feeling now like we're making more progress.
I would agree.
Yeah.
And I think a key part of that is we're having these conversations. Right now, you are looking at one colony, one queen and her offspring, and you are saying, now, instead of these bees are more mite resistant, or there's some hygienic kind of behavior going on in here, you can say, I'm getting this score on a Harbo assay, I'm getting this score on a UBeO assay.
It's measurable.
Exactly. I'm collaborating with Samantha Alger's lab, the bee lab up at UVM, and we're using UBeO as part of a broader breeding program with Mike Palmer and Jack Rath and Andrew Munkris, who produce queens in part for Betterbee's sales. But all of these operations, we're working with them, and we're doing multiple tests on the same colonies. We're trying to answer these same questions. If I am a bee that is, high on a Harbo assay, am I always going to be high on a UBeO assay, or are there possibilities that we've got bees that perform well on one, poorly on another? And then, which of them matters more? Or are both of them equally resistant? Or do you really want that full overlap to get the most resistant bee? We don't know it, but we're at the stage now where we're doing good work, we're quantifying this stuff, and we can start to answer these questions.
Yeah.
So I'll put my economic practical application hat on here. There may be high VSH bees that UBeO doesn't find.
Right.
There may be but we know that there is a lot of overlap.
But would it be VSH? Because Varroa sensitive hygiene, that's the hygiene component. That may
That's
be
the
pure
workers
SMR.
opening and pulling.
Right,
Yeah.
that may be pure SMR without a hygiene allele
Yeah.
or multiple alleles.
So
or,
there may not be perfect overlap, but useful information.
there's huge overlap.
Yeah,
I mean, I would
getting
say, for
getting
sure.
useful information in an economical way from UBeeO is, in my opinion, a lot easier than getting it
Absolutely.
any other way that we have at this point.
Well, we touched on that a second ago too, because you pointed out that if you're using an IPM strategy and you get
Yeah.
mite loads and you kill the little buggers, which you should if you're over threshold, you can't get accurate Harbo data.
Yeah, and
Because it's
I'll go
reliant on
through the
mite.
mechanics of this from my standpoint. The difference in UBeeO is it does not need mites
Correct. Yeah.
to do the test.
Yeah.
So if I'm cleaning up my bees in the fall and winter, I come into spring with very low mite loads, I can still test my queens, my potential breeders in February
Right.
or March when they start brooding and get a good result and drill down. You know, I'm going to do 30 tests on my 100 colonies in the spring. I do a third of my operation, pick the best, the ones I like the best.
Test your best.
And then if I get 5 that are good, or my 5 best, I'm going to breed only from those. You know, you can put this into a breeding program a lot easier than doing harbos in August and then not breeding until the following spring.
True.
There's less time, there's more money in it, but it's economical to do that. And I think this is going to open this up for a lot more, especially small scale queen breeders, you know, the boutique genetics producers, the broodstock producers. But I think it also opens it up to commercial producers. You know,
And if you break that mark into that market,
yeah.
now you're tipping it critical mass.
Well, I talked with Chris Werner yesterday. He's doing 10 to 13,000 queens a year. If he buys 100 UBeeO tests and tests his queen mothers, you know, goodness, he could drive that really fast.
And he's seeing uncapping already.
Yeah, we just talked about that
Yep,
this morning.
yep. So that was really exciting to hear. So
You know, you start getting that into the hands of some of the big queen producers, and all of a sudden we've got VSH all across the market.
And like some producers, I've heard them say, naysay hygiene or naysay some of that, I could care less, whatever, it's smoke and mirrors. But if the customers demand it,
They'll do it.
I love you.
Well,
Just gotta bribe
that's
him
the
with
thing. That
barbecue.
this gives you the ability. It gives you the ability not only to market. These are raised from high UBeeO
Totally.
queens,
Yep.
but if I want to wait 7 weeks until that daughter queen is laying and
Test
sell
her.
and test the daughters, I can sell high UBeeO queens
Yep.
in nukes.
Well, you could even market it as an open-mated breeder queen. I know Adam from VP way back when sold some tested, I don't know exactly what test he was doing, tested open-mated breeders.
Yeah.
Phenomenal! I had such good
Yeah.
stock come out of those.
Yeah.
Some were Carney, some were Italian.
I haven't
it's a
talked
good
about the
market.
mechanics of UBeeO and why this is better. The test, you basically pull a brood frame out of a colony you want to test, put a little piece of PVC on there, you spray the chemical on, put it back in the hive, and see how you wait 2 hours and see how the bees react to it. So you get in this cycle of, I pull a frame out of here, it takes me 4 to 6 minutes or whatever to apply it. I put it back in this hive, and then I move to this hive, I pull that out, and then I move to the next one, I move to the next one, and you do as many
You do
as
2
you can
hours
until you get
through the
close
apiary.
to 2
Right.
hours, and then
Then
you
you
come
go
back
start
and you
breeding.
start pulling on this hive, measure it, and then you pull that one out. So you just get in this workflow that just works really well.
Yeah.
True.
So it's not that hard to do. And
Like you
how
said,
many how many were you guys doing per cycle in a 2-hour cycle?
Well, here's what I remember. Like, what did we do in basically a day and a half? Was it 30?
30.
Something? Okay. So
With 5 people.
with 5 people over a day and a half, probably.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say? So Kara wakes up in the morning in North Carolina, flies to St. Louis, 5 months pregnant, drives 3 hours to my apiary. It's approximately 1 p.m. We shake hands, and she's like, let's get rocking. It was just me, her, and Kyle Day, I believe, one of my bee friends. We did 30 or maybe slightly more than that between 1 and whenever we stopped, and we didn't work that late. It was warm out. So it's more than twice as fast, I would say. So that's you have to throw that into the equation too. 'Cause some people will be like, oh, well, it's expensive. What that works and is really good and takes you anywhere isn't freaking expensive. And plus, the more that they produce, and when the cool kids, hey, all the cool kids are doing this, so you need to buy it. Whenever everybody starts doing it, then they can get their costs down too. They have to make money, but then you can do larger batches.
Well, and you've talked about the benefit for sideliners. You talked about the benefit for commercial guys. I think that there's also a benefit in UBeeO for hobbyist beekeepers. Because if I buy one queen, or if I just catch a couple of swarms and I'm sitting around, I'm still going to be making management decisions that could lead to the production of more queens. Right? At any moment, that is going to happen to any beekeeper on any scale. So if I have the opportunity to say, well, I'll just order a UBeeO kit and I'll do a couple of tests, maybe I'll share it with my buddy in the bee club and he'll do a couple of tests. Now all of a sudden I've got information I didn't have before. I can look at my 6 colonies and I can say, you know what, that's the star. That's the one that I want to try to breed with. I might not be doing a UBeeO assay on every colony every year. If I'm a commercial guy, maybe I'm going to get one UBeeO kit. I'm going to do tests on 10 out of my 100 breeders. But now I have more information because I know that out of the 10 I tested, hey, 2 of them had this interesting trait going on. Maybe I'll focus on those with some of my breeders.
The significance of the UBeeO, you